I was not raised in the church, and I basically developed on atheism due to just a lack of anything else. How is it? I don't think it is possible to convince somebody who is in that situation and also is a logical person who relies on rational arguments to come to conclusions. Basically, what I'm saying is I don't have a lot of faith points to just take somebody's word for it that there is a God, that Jesus Christ is that God, and all the other things that go along with that. How can it? Do you believe it is possible to convince somebody like that?
First and foremost, no, I do think that there is logical, demonstrable proof for the Christian God. I think the transcendental argument is a valid, sound, logical argument. I think that the argument is itself about the status of logic and reason itself. So no, I would not ask a person to believe Christianity just simply on hearsay or because somebody claimed to have had XYZ experience. I mean, it's not necessarily wrong to believe on the basis of hearsay because, I mean, somebody could, as the examples I gave earlier, you could believe in something true for bad reasons. So plenty of Christians are convinced of Christianity for bad reasons. I mean, we see that with the classical arguments. I mean, they're bad arguments, but they do work at times to convince people for the wrong reasons. However, when it comes to the truth or falsity of the positions themselves, I mean, that's a separate issue even from bad arguments about the position. So I would say, and that would be the fallacy, right? Just because something's badly argued doesn't mean that it's necessarily true or false. So,
and there's the same with atheists. A lot of atheists become that because of emotional reasons.
Sure. Well, my first response would be, no, actually, I would make a logical, rational argument for Christianity and for the Christian God. And the argument would be that logic and reason themselves are impossible without the Christian God. So that's the transcendental argument in short. So when you say things like, and I'll let you have the floor in a moment, when you say things like that it's morally superior perhaps to have sort of Christianish values, but that logic and reason is kind of the domain of atheism or science, is what at least what it sounded like you were saying. I would say, no, I think to the contrary. I don't think that atheists can give an account for a justification for logic and reason at all.
My account for reason would be that my brain is essentially a sophisticated computer that has arrived at these abilities that are useful for the environment that I'm evolved to be in, and intelligence and reason and mathematical spatial relations, all that are a part of that.
So let's back up here. So are you saying that the spatial relations and the things that you perceive in the world are only in your brain, or are they actually metaphysically existing realities out there in the world?
I would assume that the world is actually real and that we're not all in the Matrix, but I wouldn't say that I can prove that to be the case. I just reject nihilism a priori.
Right. But you mentioned a series of things in this description. You mentioned the brain, quote unquote. You mentioned that it's, quote, sophisticated, which suggests levels of complexity as opposed to things that are non-complex or simple. You mentioned that it had progressed in the sense of evolving. You mentioned objects in the external world, which, again, kind of presupposes a lot of metaphysical categories like an external world, which you mentioned there. You mentioned the ability to perceive objects, which suggests that there's identity over time in objects, that words have meaning, that there is objective truth value in propositions. And so what I'm getting at here is not just to spit out a bunch of phrases or arguments, but that all of those things kind of require a structure to epistemology and to metaphysics. Would you agree or would you not?
I would say that you can, so yes, they must physically exist, all these objects that are being perceived. And then all the categories that relate to those things or describe those things, I would say those could be invented by intelligent observers.
Okay, so you think that numbers, logical laws, the external world, time and space are merely invented by us?
I would say that they are descriptions for patterns that exist in nature.
Oh, so wait a minute. So exist, that's metaphysics.
Granted.
Okay. Go ahead.
So somebody didn't just arbitrarily decide numbers and, well, if somebody made that based on no external observations or reality, then other people would not go along with it. But we all agree that two things are two things and three things are three things, and that a cat is a little bit like a dog and less like a cactus.
Okay, so if we all agreed that numbers were the opposites of themselves, or that would that actually objectively change the numbers, that the principles that are being reflected? No, it would not. Okay. Well, I thought you just said that it was because we all agreed on it.
It's not because we agree on it. We agree on it because it is self-evidently true.
Oh.
Or we can observe that it is true.
How do you know that observations are self-evidently true? I mean, can we misinterpret our observations?
Yes, but I have to assume.
So how do we know that we aren't misinterpreting our observations in these cases of things that you're saying are self-evident?
Because if that is the case, then basically nothing that I think or see I can take as at face value or true. And if that's the case,
so it's self-evident. So that's circular.
So I assume I'm taking it as an axiom that nihilism is not true, that there is some truth in the world and we can observe it, and that our observations aren't completely illusory.
Mm-hmm. Right, but what I'm pointing out is that that's
you're
not
right. I can't give an account for why that is the case.
Oh, okay. Well, that's what we got to do when we believe in these things, is give an account for them, because nobody wants to believe in something irrational. Nobody wants to believe in something that they can't give an account for. But remember, point 2 that you made was that, nobody should be asked to believe in something that they don't have a good logical, rational account for. So I've heard you believe in a lot of things that now you're saying, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot or be rude, I'm just saying that in the interrogation process here, I'm just looking for an account for not one thing, not a couple things, but a host of metaphysical and epistemological principles and categories that are necessary to have the structure that you said, or seem to say, exists in the world and not just in the brain. But what's the justification for believing in those things and the existence of these things? You did say, which anytime we hear the word existence, we're in the domain of metaphysics. And the reason I'm raising all these objections is because if you read somebody like David Hume, who's a consistent atheist, in you guys' camp, he pretty much calls you guys out in exactly what I'm doing. He's just going to say there is no justification for these things.
Right. So I would admit that there is no justification if you want to take it to the deepest level of logic, but that we have to assume some bedrock reality in order to function as living beings.
Okay, but now you're bringing in value judgments, though. Like, well, why are we supposed to function? Maybe everything should degrade and devolve into the universe just collapsing. Like, why ought we to function and flourish? That's a value judgment.
Good question. I guess if I were pressed on that, I would say that I just want to.
Okay, but that's not. Again, I'm not trying to be rude. People think I'm being a dickhead when I say this. It has nothing to do with the debate. So that you want that is a taste preference, subjective. Okay, I want to eat ice cream here in a minute. I'm not being a douchebag. I'm just saying that I'm illustrating that it really has nothing to do with justified true beliefs, right?
Okay, so suppose I took as an alternative some argument for, well, you say that specifically Christianity must be true, not just deism. how would you establish that?
Well, because all of these transcendental categories that underlie any possible act of perception or predication, they need a specific type of metaphysic, a specific type of world, specific type of logic, epistemology, reasoning, ethics, and a specific kind of structure to the world. So it's not like any kind of God will work to just stick in there. We need a paradigm. So ultimately what's being argued for here is not just an abstract conception of some kind of mental deity or thing. It's actually an entire paradigm, an entire worldview of how the world's structured, how man is made in the image of God. So he has the ability to reason, he has the ability to use logic, which are, you know, invariant metaphysical principles that are out there operant in the world. And so he has an ethical dimension and domain to his being because he's made in the image of God. So we have a basis for ethics. We have a basis for doing science because the future will be like the past precisely due to divine providence. I'm not saying it's true because I'm saying it. I'm saying that when you look at the paradigm as a whole, the things that we use to predicate these transcendental categories, they make sense and they're coherent and they are clearly there in the Christian paradigm. When we look at the other paradigms, atheism, materialism, radical skepticism, scientism, they can't give an account for logic, reason, demonstrating anything. They can't give an account for the various metaphysical things that we saw were needed for your claims and for your worldview. And so that's how I'm saying that the argument is an argument for our position because the other positions can't give an account for the things that they're using.
So why can't it be the case that a universe exists or was created through some means unknown to us, and then it just happens to give rise to a reality where you can ascribe numbers accurately, and there's rules of rationality that are true in this universe, and laws of physics are true in this universe, and we exist in this universe, and so on?
Because we need a specific type of God to string the pearls together, so to speak. So to just say that there's some God out there that has no direct connection to the world, like you mentioned, deism, that would not be a God who could sustain and keep in being every object and every relation between objects over time. So, for example, if you read St. Maximus, he has a really good essay about the logi. And one of the things in his logi doctrine is that he thinks that the divine ideas are the undergirding structure, fabric, and way that the world is constructed. It's like the fabric of how reality is constructed in the divine mind, and that's a perfect justification and providential way for reality to be guided, to be held together, etc. So there's a specific metaphysic that we have that the other worldviews like deism don't have. And what I'm saying is that when you adopt those positions, they end up in absurdity. So in other words, it doesn't actually do us any good to admit deism, because deism wouldn't solve the problems, for example, of predication. So I need a God who has knowledge of all the facts, which I'm learning analogically. So we need an omniscient God. And we need a God who's present at every point for the facts to actually correlate to one another. Any fact, right? So in other words, I can't predicate without universals. Universals and particulars presuppose the one and the many question, and the one and the many question has to be grounded in a God who is both immanent and transcendent, omniscient, etc.
Okay, I don't know what all of those mean.
So in other words, let me give you an easier example. So if we had a deistic God, there would no longer be telos in the universe. So in other words, I need the immanent presence of God. I need the what's called divine conceptualism, where we ground things in the mind of God. If I don't have that, then this world becomes basically, the God there is useless. And that's why in the history of Western philosophy, the deistic God gets tossed out, because he's a useless placeholder. He has no relation to anything. In other words, I'm saying it wouldn't solve the metaphysical and epistemic dilemmas that we think God solves unless we had the specific theological paradigm of orthodoxy.
Okay, and what exactly exists in this world that would not be accounted for by random entropy spawned universe?
All of the transcendental categories that I mentioned: abstract objects, logic, anything invariant and immaterial, such as numbers, advanced mathematics. I mean, none of that stuff would even be possible if the universe were pure chaos and just random molecules in motion.
Well, if you have suppose a space of pure entropy, that space cannot be homogeneous, because if it were, it would not be entropic. And so within that space, you would have pockets of less entropy and pockets of greater entropy. And in one of those pockets of lesser entropy, there is our universe. That is a theory that I hear scientists say is what they actually think is the case now.
Right, and that's interesting, but the critique that I gave was that you can't actually make sentences. So before you get into these, grand stories of entropy and all that, which is fine, I don't mind you doing that, but like you're going to have to be able to give an account for how you can make sentences, which that was my original line of questioning. I was posing the objection that I don't believe that in your worldview you can account for predication at all. So if you're going to give me big science theories, that's fine, but you're going to have to give an account first for how you make sentences, given your worldview.
I have a certain capabilities to make sentences, and you know what I mean. I know what I mean because we speak the English language in common.
Yeah.
Which
none of those are all bad arguments. I'm not trying to be a dick, but so the fact that you claim to have the capabilities is not a justification. That's a biographical detail. So I'm asking for a justification in the epistemological sense for the ability to predicate meaningful, true statements, true propositions about objects in the external world.
Okay, I don't see why you lack that ability if the world were created randomly, so to speak.
So again, if everything is matter in motion and it's chaotic, I need an account for how there is structure, logic, reason, invariant objects, the ability to predicate, value judgments, metaphysical claims, existence, etc. All this stuff that the skeptical atheist tradition has rejected, you're now relying on it. And I'm saying, okay, if you want to rely on it, which I agree with you, we have to have those things to be able to speak meaningfully about the world. We have to give an account for those things.